near the North Pole that something pretty amazing had happened. As they're looking into the limits of the magnetic compass, they found that deep inside the Earth, yes, you have equivalent of a bar magnet, although that's not exactly what's going on, produces what's called a dipole field, like a simple magnet, except they found that the dipole had moved from 1831, when it was located here. The new magnetic North Pole in 1948 was located here, a 200-mile change. Then, if you read further, in chapter 28, Ken finally gets around to the reason that he, with his dad, wrote the book, because their conclusion was there was going to be a potential cataclysm coming when the magnetic pole, which was moving toward the North Pole, coincided with the North Pole, and then literally all hell would break loose. How do they know this? Because they set up in the Pentagon a set of study groups, which are reported on in this book. And in this, they talk specifically about the flip of the Earth. And they set up a contract with Dr. Paul Seipel, who was a big polar explorer back in those eras. And it was at the RAND Corporation. It wasn't at the Remington RAND Corporation. Ken got the typewriter company confused with the Air Force think tank. But be that as it may, Paul Seipel was an amazing guy, an amazing scientist. He actually was commissioned by the Pentagon to do a series of laboratory experiments in what would happen with rotating spheres when they had electrified cores that were separate and those cores were moving relative to the surface, and what would happen when they coincide with the actual axis of the rotating outer sphere. Again, technical language, all hell broke loose. The spheres violently flipped and produced a new equilibrium and then rotated like the Earth does now. Well, if you extrapolate up to the size of the planet, that would mean the end of most living things on the surface until new things could evolve that would be suited to the new conditions. What was very interesting to me, and was not covered in the book, and we didn't have time to cover it in the special, and we will in future months when I put together some television on this myself, is that Seipel came back from Operation Nanook, which is what they called this operation for the Strategic Air Command, and immediately got an expedition approved by President Truman, launched, headed by Admiral Byrd, taking 4,000 men to the South Pole in a 13-ship flotilla, suddenly, on an emergency basis. And when you Google Operation High Jump and read the details, it's clear to me now that somebody was suddenly very, very worried about what was going on at the South Pole. And that's an understated, unsaid part of this story. We still haven't limbed out all what was going on. I do have one anecdotal comment that Truman, because of funding and because he was not very popular in the polls and all that, he was basically not going to send the expedition at all. And on the Sunday before they were scheduled to leave, like a day or so before they were scheduled to leave, Byrd and I think Forrestal, who was Secretary of Defense then, there wasn't a Secretary of Defense, it was still Secretary of War, and a couple of the people had a meeting with him in the Oval Office, and when they came out of the meeting, Truman had suddenly agreed to Operation High Jump, even though going in he was dead set against it. So what did they show him? What did they tell him that made him change his mind? Those questions are behind all of this. So now, here's a plot of where the magnetic pole has gone from the 1800s all the way to 2005, which is the last data we have here. This is an extrapolation of from 2005 to 2010. I haven't found 2009 yet. I'm still looking. But that data may not be readily accessible, particularly if this has taken a turn and is heading more toward the pole, which is right here. The fact is that this is a stunning change, which got a lot of people in Washington extremely concerned because, and this was one of the conclusions, they debated in '48 in the Pentagon whether they would actually alert the public to this. And he's very diplomatic, But basically, the conclusion was, since they couldn't agree to do it or not to do it, they did nothing. And we have been living for 60 plus years in delightful ignorance as to the science that was measured in the field, indicating that something big is going on with the Earth, with the planet, that we are not supposed to know about. Why? Because of this. This sounds, by the way, eerily like Brookings. This is almost exactly the language of Brookings. We can't tell people if there are artifacts on the moon or Mars or Venus because it might destroy the moral fabric of society. Scientists would no longer get up in the morning trying to figure things out because they just ran into an ancient culture that knew everything, so why should they bother? That kind of thing. I think, of course, there's a much more fundamental economic and social reason, which is they do not want things to change. They need things to go on as if life was normal because they need the economic productivity if, in fact, they are going to change the lives of some people, if they're going to save the lives of some people. Because saving all of 6 billion, as Emmerich said in the film, is probably impossible unless, and there's one important caveat to that, which I'll get to momentarily, unless you figure out a way to keep it from happening at all. That's the only rational thing we can look at this data now and say has to happen. We must figure out a way to stop this from happening. Fortunately, in the physics, there is precisely such a mechanism. Now, Harry Truman was very interesting. It turns out that he probably knows a lot more, or knew a lot more about this problem than anybody has dared to write up to now. But he was not the only president. I think that every president, with the backing of the people in this place, which of course is the Pentagon, have known that something kind of bad could be on the horizon unless something was done. And the last president who was in a position to know and then to do something and do it rather overtly was, in fact, this guy on the end, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Now, Truman set up this whole history of the Earth beginning in 1946-47. We had a series of confrontations with the Soviet Union. We had their atomic bomb tests. We had our atomic bomb tests. We had a Cold War launched where, duck and cover became de rigueur for every kid in America. We have countless scholarly references and studies and tomes written on the creation of the national security state, which of course is the one we're living under, which only was amplified and hyped to an almost unbelievable level with the events of 9/11. Well, it is my theory, my model, that in fact the entire set of world events over the last 60 years, every facet of the Cold War, including the war on terror now, exists, in fact, as a cover for what they have been really using these resources, trillions of dollars of resources, to prepare for, which is the worst case scenario for 2012. And if that's correct, it means the next few months, the next few years are going to be extraordinarily interesting. What was interesting to me is that the morning after our special aired, NASA came out and attacked the whole idea of 2012 itself. Now, in Washington, there's a kind of rule of thumb. If someone is beneath your notice, if they're, fleas on the dog, if they're basically espousing a political point of view which you think is not only wrong but not even in the right ballpark, the last thing you do is take aim and elevate that in the discussion so they become an equal opposition voice. NASA, on the Monday after the special, elevated 2012 to an equal opposition voice, and anyone who is seriously investigating this set of parameters. And my feeling is, I can't prove it yet, but my feeling is because of all the 2012 specials which have been done, we were playing against two others that night, one on History Channel, no, Discovery, and National Geographic. Both